Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for gracing us with your presence this morning. Today's class is dedicated by Hensha Gansberg in memory of her beloved and unforgettable father, Irving Stone, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Rabbi Yaakov, whose 25th yahrzeit is the following Shabbos on the 10th day of Shvat, Yud Shvat. The famous stone chumash, the Schattenstein, the famous stone chumash of Art Scroll, was named for Irving Stone, who was one of the great Jewish philanthropists of the last generation, who contributed to so many causes and so many institutions, and his 25th yahrzeit is this week. So his daughter Hensha, who's also a mechotenist of mine, is dedicating it in tribute of his memory and le'elu nishmasei. May his kindness and charity and dedication to the Jewish people and to the spreading of Torah remain an eternal source of inspiration for you and your entire family and all of us. And there should be only good news and long, happy, and healthy years to you and the whole mishpacha. B'toich Klal Yisrael. The class is also dedicated by the Strasberg family in memory of Shulamis Bas Rabbi Yeshua Mordechai in honor of his yahrzeit on Gimel Shvat, on the third day of Shvat, Tehei Nishmasei Tzrura, B'tzrayir HaChaim, and may he remain an eternal source of love and light and inspiration to the family and the Jewish people. So for both of them, Tehei Nishmasei Tzrura, B'tzrayir HaChaim, and we experience the prophecy of Hekitzu V'rananu Shechnei Afar, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu B'Karav Mamash, and thank you very, very much for your partnership. So we have one source sheet, right? There's still more? There's more source sheets? Okay. Okay, so one source sheet. And please take it because we're going to follow some text inside. I also want to announce that this Mitzvah Shabbos, there'll be a big Farbrengen here on 24 Shei, which is also going to be live streamed on the yeshiva.net, 9 o'clock p.m. in honor of Yud Shvat, the 75th yahrzeit of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And that's going to be online also, here at 24 Shei, 9 o'clock p.m. A big Malava Malka and a Farbrengen. And also, for those who want some extra deep classes, so Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday in the morning, we have here a shiur for men, but it's live streamed on the yeshiva.net in a very famous discourse called Basi Lagani, exploring the secret of the Tzimtzum and the Kabbalah of how we deal with our concealments in life. That's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 7:45 a.m. Or you can watch a replay all on the yeshiva.net. Okay. So, there's often a feeling that many people share that we live in a very, very spoiled generation. I often hear people say that somebody once said, nostalgia is not what it used to be like. So people often like to say that the youth today are very, very spoiled. They all feel entitled. If something is going wrong for them, it's a crisis. And it's focused so much on feeling your emotions and how I'm feeling and I'm not feeling. I'm in the mood, I'm not in the mood. And many people lament. Somebody once told me, well, you think I had it easy? I had it much harder than my children. But we learned they have to put one foot ahead of another foot and move on with life and stop complaining and just make believe you're happy even if you're miserable. And tell yourself that you're happy. And that's how you do it. You do the right thing, and that's how we survived. And that's the way to live life. And this whole new ethos of exploring emotions and healing emotions, this has hijacked Judaism. It has hijacked the Jewish tradition. It has hijacked faith. It has hijacked family life. And this is a very, very common sentiment that many people share. Somebody once said, it's b'dikas chametz you do once a year. You check for chametz once a year before Pesach. But to do b'dikas chametz constantly, I have to check what's happening in all the holes and crevices of my heart and my home and my family and my marriage and my relationship. It's not the way to go. Once a year, the night before Pesach, check for chametz, do b'dikas chametz, and get rid of it. But this whole idea of exploring emotions, understanding your emotions, I remember when I was growing up, I don't know how many people went to therapy. I mean, it was embarrassing to say that you go to a therapist. It was like unheard of unless you were mamash a certified, completely dysfunctional, right? Today, it's like if you're not going, like, what's wrong with you? Like maybe you need help. So it's very interesting developments, and we also have a lot of therapists sitting here in the class as well, coaches and therapists and life coaches and mentors, etc., teachers of different types. And it's a very interesting question, and people often feel that, somebody told me the youth today they're just narcissistic and selfish, and it's all about them and I and my feeling. Like somebody once said, this generation is the I generation. Everything is about I. There's an iPhone and an iPod and an iPad, and finally there's a game that's called We, but it's spelled with two I's. So it's also about I. But I want to today share a perspective that I think can broaden the conversation and expand it a little bit. Because, real truth is usually not about just delegitimizing one view and just embracing another one without understanding where it's coming from. But real truth is, as we say every morning right before davening, it's the 13th formula of how you learn Torah. Shnei ksuvim ha'makshishim zeh zeh, ad sheyavai ha'kasav ha'shlishi v'yachriya b'neihem. You have two verses that contradict each other very often in the Torah. And then there's a third verse that makes peace between them. It reconciles between them. So the question is, what do you have to have two verses that contradict each other? And then bring in a third partner to reconcile. Don't make a contradiction. Now, you won't have to have a shadchan. Right? But the answer, of course, is that the contradiction is part of arriving at the truth. In other words, to be able to fully reach the third level, you first have to have the first verse that says one thing, and the opposite verse that says the exact opposite thing. And you could see that contradiction very clearly. And then you can appreciate the third one, which incorporates and synthesizes and encompasses both. And the same is true with many, many areas of life, and it's also true, I think, at least partially in this area as well. So we're going to learn today a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the movement of Chassidus. Everybody knows the Baal Shem Tov was born in 1698, on the day of Chai Elul, the 18th of Elul, Shnas Nachas, in the Hebrew calendar, Hey Alafim Tafnon Ches, in the English calendar, it's 1698. And he passed away Shavuos, Tavkov Chav, 1760. And he has a teaching. The teaching consists of literally 2 lines. But I think those 2 lines could probably fill up 3 books of psychology and internal work. And it's a Torah that he teaches on Parshas Beshalach. And he takes a few words that seem superfluous and really out of character, and he shows that those few words contain not just a perspective, not just meaning, but a very profound perspective on this entire concept of navigating our own journeys, internal journeys through life for ourselves and the people we're close with. So let's see the context of the story. And you have it in your source sheets. It's going to be the first source. We go to Parshas Beshalach, the beginning of Beshalach, which is Shmois Perek Yudalad, the Exodus chapter 14. Let's remember the context of the story. The Jewish people at last have left slavery. They have left bondage. In Parshas Bais, last week we learned that they were in Egypt for 430 years. Rashi says that according to the calculations, they actually in Egypt itself, they were there for 210 years. But it's interesting that the Torah says they were in Egypt for 430 years. And after 430 years, they finally depart. Free at last, free at last. And they left. And Paro himself is the one who told them, get out of my country. Out, out, out. You're free. Do whatever you want. Take whoever you want and leave, fearing that he and his entire people are going to perish. As they're making the trek outwards of Egypt, a very strange instruction is given to Moshe. And that happens in Parshas Beshalach, close to the beginning. And you have it here in the original text from the Chumash, and you also have the English translation. I took it from Sefaria. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Leimer, Hashem speaks to Moshe, and what does he say? Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yashuvu v'yachanu l'fnei pi achiris bein migdal v'nayam l'fnei bal tzvayin nichech ha'isachanu alayam. Speak to the Jewish people, tell them they should turn back. They should go backwards, in other words, in the direction of Egypt. And they should encamp before a place called Pi Hachiros. It's between a place called Migdal, and it's between the sea. The sea is on the other side. It's before an idol that was called Baal Tzafoin. They should encamp opposite that Baal Tzafoin, that pagan idol, facing the sea. What's going to happen, he says? Paro is going to say about the Jewish people, they're trapped, they're lost, they don't know where they're going. It's like they're zigzag, they went there, they're going back. Basically, the desert has closed in on them. And he says in the next verse, verse 4, V'chizakti eslev Paro. At that moment, I will make Paro stubborn and harsh. V'rodaf achareim, he will pursue them. V'yikavdu b'Paro b'chol chelev v'yadu Mitzrayim k'ani Hashem v'yasuken. I will then be glorified through Paro and his entire army. The Egyptians will finally recognize that I am Hashem, and this is exactly what they did. They followed the instructions, which was unique and novel because usually you don't go back to the lion's den after you have escaped the lion's den, but they went backwards. And indeed, the Torah says, Paro finds out the situation, and he decides to go pursue them. He and his people speak to each other, and they say, what insanity has overtaken us? We have had an army of slaves. We have had an army of talented, skilled, dedicated slaves. How did we do this to ourselves, allowing them to be free? And Paro takes his troops and his army, as the Torah says, his choicest chariots, skilled fighters and warriors to go bring back the slaves and force them to come back into slavery. And the Torah continues in verse 9, Pasuk Tes. Vayirdefu Mitzrayim achareim v'yasigu esam choinim aleim kol sus rechav Paro Parshas v'chele al pi achiz lefnei Baal Tzvat. The Egyptians, all of Paro's chariot horses, his horsemen, his army, pursue them. And indeed, they reach them. And they're all there encamped right at the sea, next to the place called Pi Achiz, exactly where Hashem said they should be. So now, as we say in English, they're stuck between the rock and the hard ball, or in this case, you would say between the rock, literally, and the sea. On one side, you have the Egyptian army, on the other side, you have a sea. Upare Hikriv, Paro now approaches them. He comes closer. The Israelites look up and they see the Egyptians. And the Egyptians are advancing at their rear. They're coming closer and closer. They become very frightened. They're not just scared, they're terrified, they're overwhelmed. And they begin to scream, they cry out. They yell, they cry out to God. And then they say something to Moshe. Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us to the desert so that we die and we get buried here? What is this that you have done to us? You have made our lives so much more miserable. This is what we told you when we were in Egypt. We told you, you're a dreamer. This is a horrible idea. Leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians. Wouldn't it be better to be a slave to the Egyptians than to perish and die a miserable death in the desert? Wow. They're not just challenging Moshe and saying, we're scared. This is frightening. What they're telling Moshe is that this entire experiment was futile. We were begging you not to do this. You know, when Moshe came to the Egyptians, to the Jewish people, he had to convince them and argue with them and persuade them, and many times they didn't listen to him. In the beginning of Parshas Vayet, it says they couldn't even listen to him. And now finally they were enthusiastically excited. They got out, and the nightmare is unfolding right before their eyes. It's all over. What did Yogi Berra say? It's not over till it's over. And here it indeed wasn't over. Not only not over, but now it's going to be much, much worse because there's going to be retribution for escaping. And therefore, they are overwhelmed. But if we listen to their words to Moshe Rabbeinu, these are very, very profound and painful words because they're not just talking about the fact that it's a frightening situation and the question is what to do, but it's really a very, very profound sense of desperation. And we can understand this, if I can apply this a moment to people's personal lives. It often happens. You know, a person sometimes makes great strides to liberate themselves from toxic, difficult, challenging situations. They extricate themselves from the shackles, physical shackles, and especially emotional shackles, and wounds that have enslaved them for so many years. And then when they think, they breathe, they finally are breathing. There's finally a new chapter in their life. They finally turn the page. There's a new trajectory. And right there and then they see that nothing has changed. In fact, Paro is right there with his entire army stuck again. And that's when they turn to the Moshe and the Moshe inside of them. and say, this was such a horrible, horrible thing. What did you do to us? Not enough graves in Egypt? In other words, this is really a death sentence you took us. We know we're going to die here. So we could have died there. Oh, you don't have enough graves there, and that's why you took us out. In other words, they see the entire redemption as a horrible, horrible fantasy, as an experiment that will never, ever work. It can't work. It just can't. It's obvious that this is a death trap. And the question is, why did we need this? Why did you have to delude us? Just kill us in Egypt and bury us there. And they tell to Moshe, you remember, this is what we asked you. This is what we begged you. Right? Chadal mimenu, leave us alone. Don't feed us good news. Don't talk to us about redemption. It's not practical. It's not relevant. It's not happening. This is familiar. We had very little control, but at least we knew what's coming. We had our little control. We knew this is what life is. You opened us up to a different consciousness. You expanded our horizons, but just to stand here, Pare standing right behind us and mocking all of us. Why set us up for such failure? Moshe now answers them. His answer we need to listen to, because this is quite a faithful and intense conversation. Vayomer Moshe ela'am. What does Moshe say? So there's 2 verses describing Moshe's answer. Vayomer Moshe ela'am. This is verse Yud Gimel, verse 13. Moshe speaks to the people. What does he say? The first thing is, Al tiro. Don't be afraid. You're panicking. You're in fear. We understand. But I'm telling you, you don't need to be afraid. Why not? Hisyatzvu. Hisyatzvu means stand. Stand firm. Uru'u es Yeshuas Hashem asher yasa lachem hayom. Witness the deliverance of Hashem that He will perform for you today. Wow. So Moshe says, I get it. This is scary, but you don't have to be scared. You'll stand there and watch the salvation you're going to experience. And then he says these words. Ki asher isem es Mitzrayim hayom lo yseisifu l'roisam oid ad olam. Because as you see Egypt today, you will never see them again for eternity. As you see Egypt today, you will never see them again. Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishim. Hashem will do battle for you, He will fight for you, and you could remain silent. As they say in English, be silent, just breathe. Calm down, stay firm. The fighting will happen, don't worry. And indeed, we all know the rest of the story. In the next scene right after this, Hashem tells them to tell the Jewish people to travel further. And as they go into sea, they experience the great moment of Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea through which they pass. And when the Egyptians pursue them, they drown, and indeed they never see them again forever. That's the story. That's the text. If you look at Moshe's words to them, and indeed we did once a whole class about this is not going to be the focus today, but the Mechilta tells us that from Moshe's response you could see that the Jewish people split up into 4 groups. And he had to address each group. One group said, let's just jump into the sea. Let's kill, at least we'll die as free people with dignity, like in the Masada story. Instead of falling into the hands of our captors, let's die. We'll kill ourselves. We'll jump into the sea. That was one group. We want to die as free men and women and children. Another group said, let's surrender. We'll raise the white flag and tell Pare, okay, yeah, it's over. Another group. A third group said, let's fight. Maybe we'll die, but let's go down fighting in battle. Let's go down as heroes. And a fourth group said, let's daven, let's pray. And Moshe Rabbeinu rejected all 4 groups in his words. That's why he's speaking to different groups. The first group, he says, Hisyatzvu. Hisyatzvu means stay put, stand. Don't move, stand, don't jump anywhere. The next group that said, let's go back, he says, you see Egypt today, but you're never going to see them again. You're not going back to Mitzrayim. The third group said, let's fight. He said, no, God will do the fighting. The fourth group said, let's pray. Even that, he said, you be silent. What, yeah? You have a journey. Continue your journey. You have a destination. Google Maps says Mount Sinai is your destination. Follow the map. Or in this case, it's not Google Maps, it's GPS, which is God's positioning system. So G is right. We could replace Google for a different G, for the ultimate G. Follow Vayiso. If the sea needs to split, they'll split. So Moshe says a lot of things here. But according to any interpretation here, one thing is perplexing. And that is, I underline these words, as you see Egypt today, you will never see them again. What does he mean with these words? They know that they see Egypt today. They don't need Moshe to tell them that they're seeing Mitzrayim today. That's why they were screaming. That's why they were terrified. That's why they had a panic attack. If they wouldn't have seen Mitzrayim, they wouldn't have been afraid. It's because they see Pare, they see all the Egyptians pursuing them. They picked up their eyes. The Torah says right before that, Vayisu b'nei Yisrael eseineim, and they saw it with their eyes. They don't need Moshe to tell them that they're seeing Egypt today. What does Moshe mean with these words? As you see Egypt today, you will never see them again. What's this comparison? Moshe should just say, very simply, stand firm. You will see the Yeshua of Hashem. You will never see the Egyptians again. God will fight for you, and you will be silent. But he makes an emphasis of using these words. Ki kasher isem es Mitzrayim hayoim lo yseisifu liroisam ad olam. First of all, the words seem superfluous. They don't add anything. And not just superfluous, but much more than that, it seems out of context because we know that they saw them. That's not the issue. That's the problem. Tell me that I'm not going to see them again, that we're going to get rid of them. They're going to die, they're going to perish, they'll be destroyed, they'll drown. If you translate the words literally, it means, as you see Egypt today, you will never see them again. In other words, not with all their might. Asheri isimis Mitzrayim hayom, just seeing what you're seeing today, not just the might. Take a look at the next source, what the Baal Shem Tov says on this. You see, Baal Shem Tov al Torah Parshas Beshalach. I'm going to read it and translate. Ha Baal Shem Tov Zechronu Levracha Pirish. Kasher Yisem es Mitzrayim Hayom Leisesifu L'Roisam Oid Ad Olam. Those words actually contain the entire secret here. They're not just words. You see them today, you won't see them again. Because even if you suggested, well, Moshe Rabbeinu wants to say, you see this powerful army? They're kaput. They're done. They're finished. So that's what he could emphasize. Don't worry. They're over. They're finished. He's emphasizing something about seeing them. Right? He could have said, stand, watch the Yeshua of Hashem. You're frightened of them. They're done. Pirush. Kasher isem es Mitzrayim hayom lesesifel roisam oisam adolam hainu hariya sheriisam oisam hayom. He garmalachem shaloisesifel roisam oisam leroisam oid ad olam. I need you to see them today. The fact that you see them today, that is what's going to allow you never to see them again. If you don't see them today, I'm afraid you're going to see them again and again and again and again. So he's not just saying you see them today, you won't see them. They know they're seeing them. The fact that you're seeing them, that's what's going to allow you to get rid of them.
It's like conquering the enemy, right? We've conquered the enemy and it is us at the moment.
Yeah. That's it. Those are his two lines. So the reason you're not going to see them again is there's a condition. Asheri isim es Mitzrayim hayom. Because you're ready to see them. To really see them. To face them for real. And this is not an easy instruction. This is not a simple thing. To really see them. We're running away from them. We don't want to see them. We had enough of them. We're done. What do they say? Been there, done that. I'm done. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I understand. But here's the key. You don't want to see them ever again. For this, there's one last thing you have to do. You have to see them. And Asheri isem es Mitzrayim hayom. If we all have the courage to be able to see them today, then that is what will allow you to finally never ever see them again. Because you truly face them, and therefore you can really defeat the enemy and conquer them. But if not, you will see them again. And this explains something very enigmatic. When we go through the Chumash, we see that constantly for the next 40 years, there are the Jews who say, let's just go back to Egypt. Let's go back to Egypt. This was a bad idea. Let's go back. Because they never managed to fulfill this condition, to really see them. And therefore, they were constantly seeing them. And the power of Egypt was therefore so powerful and compelling that there was this instinct and this drive at different moments, especially difficult and challenging moments, let's just go back to Mitzrayim. Even though those original troops were gone. But this was an internal voice, not coming from Egypt itself because they were gone, but this was their own internal Mitzrayim. Now what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching us here is the power and really the need to be able to look at things that may be so uncomfortable and so difficult. But we already left Egypt. But here's the challenge. You left Egypt. But when Moshe heard from them the words, there were not enough graves over there that you had to take us out. We told you, don't leave, don't take us out. Much better to be a slave than to be dead. We told you, Chadal mimenu, when they told Moshe, we told you, Chadal mimenu, leave us alone. Don't feed us fake news and fake hope. When Moshe heard those words, he understood that we're dealing with something very profound. As they say in English, you can take, right, the person out of Egypt, but how do you take Egypt out of the person? I can change the circumstances and take the slave out of slavery, but there's a whole other reality, and that is the internal Mitzrayim. And the word Mitzrayim, we will often explain, comes from the word Meitzar, Meitzarim, Gvulim, which means those things that confine us and inhibit us and hinder us and really lock us up and keep us very, very narrow and small and supposedly in control. Geulas Mitzrayim means to liberate myself from that, which is always a space of uninhibitedness, but also a place of vulnerability, because it's not small and I don't have exactly control and it's not all familiar. And for this, Moshe Rabbeinu says, there's this one last condition. Asher yi'isem es Mitzrayim hayom. You have to be able to see it. Now let's understand a little deeper and in a very personal and relevant way what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching us. When I'm fearful, when I'm frightened, when Moshe Rabbeinu says, don't be afraid, he's not just saying, don't be afraid, get rid of your emotion of fear. They're afraid that all these troops are here. So Moshe Rabbeinu says it's going to be good. But he's also including one more thing in not being afraid of looking at them. That's part of the Al Tiro. Part of Al Tiro is that pain, looking at the pain, is not dangerous. It's painful, but it's not dangerous. And there's a big difference between something being painful and something being dangerous. Sometimes, and this is a very, very common emotion in life, and it's a very, very deep survival skill. I want to repress or suppress. There's two words in English. There's repress and suppress. And the difference is, sometimes we could hide something intentionally, consciously, and sometimes it's even deeper, it's unconsciously, which means I relegate it to my subconscious, not intentionally. I don't even do it intentionally, so I don't even know that I'm doing it. Sometimes I do it because I decide to do it. But sometimes I do it and I don't even know that I'm doing it. And it's a very, very deep instinct. And the reason is we're trying to protect ourselves. So there's certain things I don't want to look at. I don't want to see it. If I don't feel it, if I don't see it, I don't look at it, I feel that I'm going to be much, much safer. We often feel that way, it's gone. If I say that it's gone, and when I say, I don't mean with my words, but with my thoughts, with my consciousness, I say it's gone, it's going to be gone. In fact, often, and this is something very common in life, we invest so much energy convincing ourselves that we don't have this emotion. Convincing ourselves that this is not something we're struggling with. Because in many ways it feels more comfortable and safer if I could tell myself, me, I don't have to deal with these stuff. I'm too big for this. I'm too moral for this. I'm too good for this. Oh, I'm already past this. I'm invested in telling myself, I'm beyond this. I'm past this. What am I, this petty, insecure, fearful person dealing with such Narishkeiten? As they say in Yiddish, sepasst nicht. It's not suitable for me. I don't have to deal with it, but I actually am. So what do? I tell myself I'm not. These are the arguments that happen in our brain. You know, sometimes you'll have an emotion and then there'll right away be a counter emotion saying, you can't have that emotion. You can't, and therefore since you can't, you for sure don't. So now I convince myself, ever happens to anybody, I convince myself that I'm not having that emotion. What do you think happens to the emotion? The emotion you think disappears. The emotion says, okay, you don't want to deal with it consciously, you'll deal with it subconsciously. So the emotion goes into the basement, goes into the cellar, and some of us have a few layers of cellars. Some of us have 1,000 cellars, 100 cellars, 200 cellars. Depends what's brought to the consciousness. But, sometimes a lot of mold in the cellar, but basically, you know, it's the boiler room. Who likes to hang out in boiler rooms? Who likes to hang out in these dungy, dark basements? Very difficult place to hang out. So these emotions might go and be buried there. And what happens is they wreak havoc, but they wreak havoc not in a conscious way. They leak out in every possible way, but suddenly the person realizes there's anger, there's so much frustration, there's no joyful presence, there's a tortured emotion, there's dissonance. I don't feel integrated. What is it? And the answer is because I can't forge these things. One cannot forge living. We can forge a lot of other things, but living you can't forge. Being in touch with the actual heartbeat of life is an experience. It's the experience of being part of life. And when I try to manipulate who I am and what my heart is and what I'm feeling and try to say what it should be like and what it has to be like, it doesn't heal everything. All that happens is part of me becomes robotic because I know I have to do X, Y, and Z, but so much of my emotional life literally needs to go undercover, or needs to be cut off from my consciousness, or needs to be amputated, or needs to be repressed, or needs to be suppressed, or needs to be hidden in order for me to be able to feel like a mensch and be able to feel safe. I was once watching a conversation between two people. It was a parent and a child. And it was a very interesting conversation. And I don't know if the word is interesting. It was a very insightful conversation, at least for me. And I think I understood it. And I think I understood it with a lot of empathy. Because I know it's from my personal life, and I think it's a very, very common thing. Basically, this child was struggling emotionally and struggling deeply emotionally. And his parent wanted to protect her child, right? How did she feel? What's the right way to protect her child? So she explained to the boy why he should not be feeling this way, with beautiful, beautiful logic, that it doesn't make sense to have this feeling. She tried to convince the emotion out of itself. And I was watching it, but it really wasn't working. It just wasn't working. It was just creating more disassociation on both sides and more estrangement. But then I realized, I happen to know this story, I happen to know this person. They came once to me for guidance and I tried to help. And this person went through a tremendous amount of difficulties and challenges in their youth. What was her way of surviving? Her way of surviving was telling herself that she's happy, not dealing with the emotions because they were very, very difficult, and really achieving great things in life, but with a deep bitterness. With a deep bitterness that you could see came out. An anger, a frustration, a certain lack of unified integration. And one can never ever be judgmental of this, because as young children, our animal consciousness figures out what is the best mechanism for me to be able to be safe in a very unpredictable world. And one of the great ways of being safe is telling myself what I'm supposed to feel, you're supposed to feel, and then making believe that I feel it, and then convincing myself that I'm feeling it, and then of course, I won't complain, and I'm not feeling pain, And I'm certainly not feeling anxiety. I don't have to deal with it and everything is good. And it sounds very, very beautiful. And then, of course, if it's a religious person, and this person happens to be very, very religious, we all have the concept of emunah. Whatever Hashem does is good. So life is beautiful and life is amazing and life is perfect. And you're supposed to be cheerful. And she's telling this boy, be cheerful, be happy. You're not supposed to be feeling this way. You're not supposed to. Don't feel this way. Why did she want this from him? Because she wanted him also to be safe. And she knew maybe at the age of 3 that feeling these emotions is going to may create chaos. And therefore safety is just cover them up, put a lid, put a lock, throw away the key, and we don't go back there. And suddenly your child is triggering all the unsafety in your life. Now this is often what happens between parents and children. And sometimes grandparents and grandchildren, and teachers and students, and generally relationships. I'm saying parents and children because it's the most intimate relationship where this is happening constantly. And that is, your child shares an emotion. Our child shares an emotion. Or doesn't even share it, it's just embodying and displaying an emotion. And suddenly the mother or the father get very, very triggered. And they'll do anything to be able to eliminate that emotion, to create some type of distraction, to create some type of prize, to create some type of convincing process, to be able to neutralize or bury that emotion. There's a good reason for it. The mother and the father are trying to protect the child. If I never dealt with these emotions in my life, I learned that in order to live, I need to cover them up. I don't look at them. Suddenly, I see my child, chas v'shalom, running into the street. What do you do if you see your child running into the street? You scream, no! But there's a different way of running in the street for some people, feeling emotions. Feeling emotions can be worse than running into the street. In running in the street, maybe there won't be a car. Hopefully there won't be a car. But here we know how many cars there are waiting. Don't go there. Don't feel there. And I'll try to do anything in order to convince them, to pressure them, to reward them, to create words, but just don't go there. And this is really the desperate, loving attempt of people who love their children, trying to protect them from the chaos of life. Do what I did. I survived, and you'll also survive. And when we see that not happening, it's very, very difficult. And you know why it's difficult? It's difficult because of love. I don't want you to go to a dangerous place. And for me, this is danger. But what's the challenge? The challenge is that whenever there's parts of my life that I'm not ready to face, they don't disappear. They just get buried, and they reek and they influence me in a much more powerful way. Because if I could see it, I say, oh wow, this is what you look like. Okay. I could even see your edges. There's an expression in Job, Kates sam lachayshach. Darkness has edges. It's an amazing verse. Darkness has edges. You know what's the hardest thing when people feel that they're in darkness? They don't feel the edge of it. You know what I mean? Like you feel you're in darkness and it's just, that's it. That's the only reality. You know, when marriages get into a crisis or people have an emotional crisis, and that's it. There's no other reality. Of course, tomorrow you'll get a good night's sleep. You'll wake up, there'll be other realities. But when we're feeling it, it's infinite. It's all-consuming. So the Pasuk says, Kate sam lachayshach. Darkness has edges. It has edges. What does that mean emotionally? When I could see something, ultimately I'll also be able to see its edges. When I don't see it, it's going to be everywhere, all the time. It's going to leak out. It's going to leak out in the middle of great moments. But I won't be able to be present because this is really what's dominating the situation, especially if so much of my energy and resources need to go in to argue with myself and convince myself out of it. So do you imagine how much inner frustration there is, and anger there is, and dissonance there is? And that's why it's so hard to be able to have real peace of mind, because real peace of mind can't be forged. It's not a fake smile that I make. It's not an emoji that I send. I mean, those are cute emojis. Real presence is real. It means that you're channeling the divine life force and energy that's coming through your heart, that's coming through your soul. But there are other emotions that come in from because we have an animal consciousness that wants to survive. So when I don't look at it, when I'm not allowed to look at it, it goes deep down and it just leaks out. Literally, Like when I don't identify the leak and it's just leaking from here and leaking from there and leaking from there and leaking everywhere. And here we come to another incredible teaching by the Chayza of Lublin, the Seer of Lublin. And he says that he heard this from Reb Zusha of Anapoli. The Chayza of Lublin was, of course, one of the great students of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And he passed away Tisha B'Av, 1914. And he had a great colleague, a friend, the Rebbe Reb Zusha of Anapoli, whose yahrzeit actually was Bais Shvat. And the Chayza of Lublin says something that he heard from Reb Zusha. And it's a fascinating teaching. And I want to show you the source. If you look in your source sheet, quite daring, quite original. The second to the last source, the Mishnah says at the end of Saita, Be'ikvais Mashiach, before Mashiach comes, Chutzpah Yazgi, Chutzpah will proliferate. It'll be as available as oxygen. Right? Chutzpah will know no limits. That's the time before Mashiach. And he goes through a list of different things that will be, and one of them is V'yirei chet yima'asu. People will be disgusted by those who fear sin. In other words, those who fear sin will be ma'us, will be detested. They won't. Not only won't they be respected and honored, but they'll be despised. Yimasu from the word mius, disgust. At the surface, it seems like a very, very negative prediction. There comes a time in history before the coming of Mashiach when Yirei Chet, those who fear sin, not only are not respected, but they're loathed. Yeah, the end of Mesechus Saita. The end of Mamish, the end of Tractate Saita. This is what our sages, they give the signs of Ikvus de Mashiach. A bunch of things. So this is one of them. So the Chayz of Lublin says, I heard from Reb Zusha. And he says something very daring. He says, Reb Zusha said that this actually has a very, very profound message. And not completely negative, a very positive message. And he says, Yirei Chet Yimasu means what people will really be disgusted and what won't speak to them is a relationship with Hashem that is based exclusively on fear and dread and terror rather than love. That's what they're not going to be liking. Yimasu. Why? Because since the definition of Geula is a full intimate relationship, a relationship not only based on dread, not based on dread at all, but based on connection. So therefore, before Mashiach comes, Yirei Chet Yimasu, they won't be able to respect and cherish a relationship that's based solely on fear and dread, rather than on avodah me'ava, avodah of love. Now you'll ask, this seems like a very cute interpretation, but literally the Mishnah is trying to bring out that people will be detested by Yirei Chet. Come on, what are you giving this positive Hasidic spin on it? But the truth is, people don't understand the depth of what he's saying. He's saying if you look at the negative in the right way, you'll see something positive inside the negative. Sometimes you see a person who runs away from Yiras Chet, and you say, wow, how negative this is. So Reb Zusha is saying, yes, but if you look deeper, you'll see there's a search here that was not satisfied. What's the search? So imagine if somebody needs to motivate a husband and a wife to engage in a peaceful marriage, because there's problems. And the husband or the wife is told, you should behave as a good husband and as a good wife. You know why? Because you tell the husband, if you don't come home on time, and if you don't say the right things, she will punish you severely. No laundry, no dinner, the home will be a mess and chaos. She will punish you, she will penalize you the way she can. Or conversely. And the husband says, okay, I'm going to behave. I'm going to behave. Now, even if he behaves and does everything that says in the Ksuva, you'll say, Nebach. Like that's the motivation. The sole motivation is that I'm going to be punished. And without that, there won't be a marriage here. The Mishnah says, Schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. One of the interpretations the Baal HaTanya says is, the greatest reward you can get for a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. What's the greatest reward one gets for a worked out, deep marriage? Candies? Cotton candy? The greatest reward is a worked out, deep marriage. You're not going to get a greater reward than that. If you have a good relationship, I'm going to take you to Six Flags, amusement park. Or you're going to get free sushi every Thursday night for 25 years. The rewards may be nice, but it doesn't come close to schar mitzvah, the reward for the mitzvahs. The word mitzvah in Gemara, it says mitzvahs from the word safsa, tzevet, which means connection. The greatest reward of the mitzvah is the connection with Ein Sof, the connection itself. That's the greatest reward. There's other rewards, but that's the greatest reward. Of course, if you have a good marriage, there'll also be a lot of other good things. But the greatest reward is not anything outside of that itself. So now when it comes to our relationship with Hashem, for so many people, it could be based on fear. Yes, if I don't do the right thing, I'm going to go to Gehenna. Or I'm going to be punished in this world, I'm going to be punished in the next world. So Rabbi Jacobson said, Yirei chet yimasu. It doesn't speak to people. Why doesn't it speak to people? Because they're ready for a much more fertile and profound experience in a relationship. Yeah, listen, if a marriage is basically disintegrating and the only way you can keep it together is from some external motivation, okay, maybe it's better than nothing. Maybe it's much better than nothing. But when you're capable of a much deeper relationship and you reduce it to such a superficial motivation, it's like something is off. I'm not interested in this whole thing. This is wrong. So Reb Zusha is saying before the time of Mashiach, when you see that people detest Yirei Chet, they're detesting fear of sin, which is such a negative phenomenon. He says you could see only on the outside and say it's negative, but if you look deeper, you'll see that there's a deeper surge. What people want is a whole relationship, an empowerful relationship. If I cannot help a person work through all of their emotions and face them, you can't reach that relationship. If the only way the relationship can happen is by amputating so many of my emotions, or at least not acknowledging them, not dealing and embracing and looking at them, Moshe says, you'll never leave Mitzrayim. Emotionally and spiritually, you could never be redeemed. Because it's going to live inside of you, and you're going to see Mitzrayim, it's going to come up tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. Why? Because I never could really look at it. And I understand why. Back to that mother and that child. Back to parents and children. You're triggering very, very negative things inside of me. It's not safe. Don't be afraid of your child's emotions. It's a gift for you to go back to your own emotions. Sometimes what we see in our children is a mirror of, maybe all the time, a mirror of what I need to work on within myself. And if I'm being very, very triggered, instead of lashing out on, you're being chutzpahdik, or when I was a child, we never did this. You may be right. You may be right. You may be wrong. But the real issue is there's a deep opportunity here for introspection. Introspection doesn't mean that if somebody's running into the street and is a vulnerable child, I shouldn't hold them back. That's not what we're saying. But introspection means there's an opportunity here to go much deeper and really find out what my heartbeat looks like inside and what I am afraid of facing so deeply, because if I can face that, I won't be afraid of embracing all the parts of that child. I think I once told you before Pesach, somebody once had a very profound insight. I don't mean to remind you about Pesach cleaning, even though it's the middle of Shvat. Getting closer and closer to Geula. And for this you have to face all your chametz.
The sooner you face Pesach, the easier it'll be. Right?
Yeah. So it's interesting that before Pesach we all have this mitzvah. The Mishnah says in the beginning of Pesach, the night of the 14th of Nisan, you check the chametz with the light of the candle. And Chazal say you have to check b'chayrim or b'zdakim and all the holes and all the crevices. Now you have to remember in their days, I don't know if you ever went to how they lived even in the early 1800s. If you go to Pennsylvania, they have these tours where you could see how they lived in the early 1800s. Usually if you had a house with one bedroom, you were pretty well. If you had two bedrooms, you were, Rockefeller, you were a rich man or a rich woman. 2 bedrooms was a big, big chiddush. It was 10 people sleeping in a bed. I don't know if you know, you had one bed, sleeping in the width, not in the length. You had 10 people, and in the winter they would sleep tight so they could retain the heat, like the penguins you ever see. The documentaries of the penguins, those Hasidim in Antarctica, the black and the white. That's why Hasidim love to huddle together, Shalosh Shaddus and Tish and Vachnacht, because that keeps the warmth, in a very cold Russian or Polish winter. You got to keep together and stay warm. So literally that's how they used to sleep. But in any case, so b'dikas chametz, and people didn't have pantries, with bottles of mashke and scotch and Benedictine and Blue Label and Red Label, and then a whole freezer just made for pizza for when your son comes home at 1 o'clock in the morning. You should be able to eat pizza, and then another pantry full of cakes and mezainis and rugelach and brownies and cheesecakes from last Shavuos and for next Shavuos, etc. These were all mamish luxuries. If there was one piece of bread that remained after dinner, you were a very, very rich person. So b'dikas chametz was very visceral and in many ways very simple. Most people didn't have chametz. The whole idea of selling the chametz really developed only in the 1500s when Jews went into the business of owning inns, owning kretschmas, Motel 6s that served liquor and vodka and different scotches to all of the people in the region, which was a major source of income. And to burn it all before Pesach could be a devastating loss. And that's when the rabbinic authorities, the Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkish in Krakow and others developed this whole formula of how to sell the chametz, etc. So b'dikas chametz was a very visceral experience. You literally went the night before and you went with a candle. And the Gemara says, why a candle? Do it by day. And the answer is because the candle allows you to go into that little crevice, that little crack where the light of the sun can't reach, and to be able to see what's there. And to get rid of every last piece of chametz. And the language of the mission is we check the chametz on the night of our Ba'asar, the night of the 14th. But it's interesting, the word that's used is the opening of Pesachim, Mesachas Pesachim is Lar Ba'asar, which means light. So the Gemara says, what does it mean, the light of our Ba'asar? Does it mean the day? Does it mean the night? And for a few pages, there's a debate what the word Oir is. They didn't know when b'dikas chametz is. It says Lar Ba'asar, the light of our Ba'asar, the light of the 14th. I would say the light of the 14th means in the morning. And after a few pages, he comes to the conclusion that it means the night before. Lar Ba'asar is the night. And it's called Oir. Why just not say Lar Ba'asar, the night of the 14th? He wants to use a positive language, light, not night. But there's a very, very deep message here. And that is exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying. In Judaism, the beauty of one of the most beautiful things is that every nuance in Jewish law is a reflection of a Jewish story. It's not disconnected. Any law in the 630 mitzvahs of Torah, you'll have it in a story form in one of the stories of Chumash. You understand what I'm saying? We have 630 mitzvahs. Every one of them you first find in a story format. And the law is really giving a concrete way of dealing with that story. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you don't look at Mitzrayim today, you're going to see them forever. Look at them today, so you don't have to see them forever. How did that translate into halacha? B'dikas chametz. Looking for the chametz. Why are you looking for the chametz? Don't look. If you don't see it, better. The answer is, because it may appear middle of Pesach. Don't look, it's not there. It is there. Look. Where's this coming from? You don't see it, you don't see it. If it's on your counter, get rid of it. No, b'dikas chametz, and you got to go into the crevices and the holes. And you have to search with a nair. There's a story that the Baal HaTanya, he was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, so when he was there, he was very, very poor. And he lived in a little tiny hut, and it was literally one room, and it was a tiny room. He said, b'dikas chametz took him a whole night. So somebody asked one of his students, why a whole night? What's there to do a whole night? A little tiny room. People have big houses in Monsey or in Thomas River, and it takes them a half an hour. A whole night. So he said, the Mishnah says, you need to do it with the light of the neshama. 14. Why 14? Because the nefesh halakis, the divine soul, has 7 midos. Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. The animal soul has 7 midos. Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. You need to use the flame of the divine soul to check the 7 midos of the animal soul, so you have 14. A whole night is not enough. So there's b'dikas chametz and there's b'dikas chametz. There's a physical b'dikas chametz, but there's the emotional b'dikas chametz. And it's an interesting thing. The Mishnah says, Kol makom she'en machnisim bechametz ein tzarich b'dika. A place where you don't bring in chametz, you don't have to check. You don't have to say, we're paranoid, so we check everywhere and everywhere forever. Like somebody once said, dust is not chametz and your children are not the carbon Pesach. But a place where you don't bring in chametz, you don't have to check. There's no mitzvah to go search and check. A place where there could be chametz, you have to check. If there's symptoms, what if there's smoke, there's fire. Emotionally, that means if I'm feeling tortured, if I'm feeling dissonance, if I'm feeling the opposite of joyful presence, there's chametz. There's ego there. There's arrogance there, which is usually fear and insecurity. So I need to be able to go check. That's why, there was once one of the Vizhnitzer Rebbes told his Hasidim, he was busy with criticizing everybody else. So he says like this, B'dikas chametz is in your own pockets. I don't check the chametz in your pockets. Why not? I didn't bring in the chametz into your pockets. I brought in the chametz into my pockets. So the mitzvah is check the chametz in your own pockets, not in anybody else's pockets. The same is true emotionally. It's very easy for me to analyze your chametz. You have this, you have that, you have that. My whole life, it's the greatest defense mechanism. Everybody else is dysfunctional. I'm the only healthy person in New York. But the search for chametz is where I brought in the chametz. And the first word is oilar ba'asar, with light. Because the only way to do b'dikas chametz is when you have the light. And that's the key difference between another story in Chumash. Moshe Rabbeinu here tells the Jewish people to look at Egypt. But do you remember the story when somebody was told not to look? Sodom. Lot and his wife are running away from Sodom, and the angel said, Al tabeit machach, don't look back. Don't. And one of them did look back. Huh? That's funny. That only a female could say. I can't say that joke. Sorry. She becomes salt. What's the idea? And here he's saying to look. Ooh, there's a profound difference. By Lot it says, Vayismama. He didn't want to leave Sodom. He wanted to stay. In fact, there's a shalshelis on the word Vayismama, and he hesitated. We once spoke about it. Vayismama. He liked Sodom. It was his future. He invested in Sodom. He left Avram to be with Sodom. In fact, he became a Supreme Court justice in Sodom. V'loit Yoshe b'shar Sodom. Rashi says that day they appointed him Supreme Court justice. In fact, he had 2 daughters who intermarried to people in Sodom. He had another 2 daughters who were betrothed. He was a success story in Sodom. Finally, the Jew who assimilated and integrated and was accepted. He didn't want to leave. They tell him it's going to be destroyed as a place of doom and destruction. Please, like so many Jews didn't want to leave Egypt. In other words, so much of his heart was stuck in Sodom. How did he get out? He didn't. They schlepped him out. Oh, now if you look back, it's dangerous. Because you are identifying with Sodom. You're still there. You need to be able to create some distance before you look. You need to be able to have some reference point of freedom. You can only check chametz if you have light. When you're holding the flame, Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam. When you know that essentially I can identify with my divine consciousness, which is free, which is whole, which is full of infinite possibility and joy and confidence. Then with that flame, look. And then the looking will be powerful. The Jews who didn't want to leave Egypt also stayed back. Moshe is speaking to the people who had the courage and said, this is not our place. But even when you say this is not my place, we have to realize how internal wounds work. There's a part of us that will be resurrected at every moment of crisis and say, I shouldn't have left. I should have not left. I should have not left. Remember, these are the people who wanted to leave. They wanted to leave. They agreed to leave. They went out without food. They ran with their doughs. Lechtech acharei bamidbar, zacharti lachesed nurayich avas klulasayich. Lechtech acharei bamidbar. You followed me into an unsown desert. But yet, my animal consciousness, when it gets triggered by difficult circumstances, I say, oh, this was a mistake. And then the darkness takes over and I'm there. And then Moshe Rabbeinu says, we got this. We got this. There's a missing piece here. And the missing piece is you have to be able to allow yourself to see the pain. Because then your body and your nervous system will be able to process it. And then you'll be able to release it. Don't be afraid of looking at Mitzrayim. You're in a position where you can do it. Sometimes you're not in a position where you could do it. And this is very, very important. And that's where we come to the 2 verses that contradict each other. Sometimes people can't do this. You have to be ready to do this. You have to be open to do this. This is very deep work. So when somebody says this is a spoiled generation, they have to feel their emotions. I get it. For some people, feeling emotions equals danger. They want to protect their kids. They want to protect their kids. Talk about the world of marriage, for example. I'll be very honest with you. I don't think, today you see that what women and men were ready to put up with, to stay married years ago, people are not ready to put up today with. It's very interesting. Somebody once told me, I'm not going to tell you if it was a husband or a wife. He says, you think my marriage is simple? It's miserable, but you stay. My mother stayed, my father stayed, my grandparents stayed. But you see today, people don't want that marriage. Why not? You say, they're spoiled, they're narcissistic, they're thinking about themselves, not their kids. For sure, there are people who are narcissistic, there are people who are spoiled, but there's something deeper going on. People feel the potential for a much deeper relationship. Whenever you feel the potential of something much deeper, your system will become dissatisfied with superficiality. You understand what I'm saying? If I feel that there's no other availability, I'll stay there. But when your soul is telling you there's more, suddenly, how do you know there's more? You're feeling a deep dissatisfaction with it. What is? It's really Moshe Rabbeinu inside of you saying you don't belong in Mitzrayim anymore. But the journey out can be grueling because it's part of me. And it's part of me for so many years. So when I can hold the oil arbasa, when I can hold the candle of my soul, and identify with that inner conviction and knowledge that at your core you're not a slave, and at your core you're not damaged, and at your core you don't need somebody else to tell you that you have value, and at your core you're not this needy, ridiculous person who's just a burden on everybody, on their family and on society. At your core you're a divine manifestation of light. Now Moshe Rabbeinu says you have to be able to look at Mitzrayim because it's paralyzing me. The fact that I'm not aware of what's happening inside of me, the fact that I cannot create space and hold space with empathy for all of these emotions and experiences only means that they go into the system, they lock themselves behind closed doors, and they wreak havoc in every possible way, creating more frustration, more resentment, more anger, more dissonance, more disassociation, more numbness, more difficulty, more challenges, and simply more negative energy, rather than truly being fully present to what is. Now you'll say, but what happens? I see this Egypt inside of me, and it's very, very disturbing. It's very, very challenging. Yes, it is. But when I can hold space for it and say, yes, it's challenging and it's difficult, ultimately, I can breathe through it and see its edges. And when I could see its edges, it can be quarantined rather than overwhelm the entire system and define who I am, essentially. Now, it's interesting because this is something counterintuitive. Sometimes people feel if you want to be present fully at a bar mitzvah, at a wedding, this was a family vacation week, right? What are they called? Yeshiva week. So Jews went to their natural habitat, Miami. The Amish have a natural habitat in Pennsylvania. We have a natural habitat, it's called Florida. For some people, it's the Hamptons, whatever, all the natural habitats. A new one became Cancun, is a new natural habitat for Jewish people. Now, vacation usually triggers a lot of issues in families. As you know, anybody who was on vacation this week, between marriages, because it's not predictable, there's no regular schedule. You need a little bit of an adventurous spirit. Usually you miss a flight or it got delayed. So somebody's stuck in the airport for 5 hours and you forgot the sandwiches, etc. And the smell of everybody else's sandwiches really makes you regret this entire journey. What happens on the airplane, we're not even going to discuss. But it takes an adventurous spirit, and a lot of things come out. And people often feel in order to be present in life, if I could just get rid of all the negative emotions and just be fully present, it'll be amazing. But it's the contradiction. Because when I get rid of, quote unquote, and I repress the negative emotions, they're all there. And I feel that there's a dissonance. I feel that I'm not here. I'm just making believe I'm here. And your kids pick up on it immediately because they know the subconscious much better than they know your conscious. You want to learn about your subconscious? Listen to your children talk about you. Huh?
That's first generation.
Yeah. So it's important to understand. This is never done in a this should never be done in a judgmental way. There's two verses that contradict each other, right? And sometimes it becomes about a process where I'm just busy worshiping my pain. That's all I do. I worship my pain all day. I'm not even liberating myself from it. All I want to explain to myself is how wounded I am, how in pain I am, how helpless I am. Who is the person really? Who is the person really not respecting themselves? When I feel that I have to hold on, there's nothing outside of my pain. There's no other reality. It's because the person doesn't know their own inner value. We were talking the other day, Shabbos, I was giving a shir, so we spoke about this, that sometimes people hold on to their pain forever for a very good reason, because they feel that they are the only witnesses to it. And if they let go of it, they're doing an injustice to themselves and to society. Because I am the only witness, and if I let go of the pain and I don't identify with it completely, the last witness is gone. But the truth is, you always have a right to grieve your pain. You always have a right to be a witness to it. But there's no mitzvah that I have to identify my entire identity as this. My entire identity is not this. Your identity is that you're a chelik elokam imal mamash. You're a divine piece of light. And whenever you want and whenever you need, you have a right to grieve. And you have a right to feel pain. And you have a right to cry. It's not forbidden. I don't have to say that my entire identity is the pain that somebody else did to me, and that is all there is to me for me to be a witness. You can serve to be a witness whenever you feel that you need to be a witness for it. So now we see another very interesting thing in the story of liberating ourselves from Egypt, and that is that when the Jewish people come out of Egypt, we have the Seder, and everybody knows that we break the matzah, yachatz, and the big part of the matzah gets hidden as the afikomen. We put it away as the afikomen, and later we're going to retrieve it. And somehow in Jewish tradition, what happened, the custom became that the children are the ones who go and find the afikomen, and then they don't give it back to you until you give them a handsome reward. In my days, it was usually a black, black and white, or those bells. You remember those bells they had? You remember those bells, right? Yeah, they can kill you on the spot. You didn't have to wait a day. Today you got to wait a day. That killed you on the spot, but they were delicious, especially when you got to the bottom of it. And if you were like Rockefeller, then you got a calculator for Afikomen or a Parker pen. Today, if you give your kid a calculator for Afikomen, they'll call child services on you for giving a calculator. That's like mamish abuse. A black and white, you're b'chlal not a human being. You're like a UFO. It's more like, Lamborghini, a private yacht, they'll do a private jet. I mean, a tablet, maybe, if you're mamish a schnorrer, maybe a tablet. You'll get away with it. So what's this idea? This idea they take the afikoim and they're the ones who give it back to us. So you could just say, it's a minhag, it's part of the Seder, fun to make it a little entertaining. But the fact that this has become so widespread means there's a secret, there's something profound here. And that is, it's telling us something. There are things that we hide in our life, and it's usually broken matzahs. And whatever you hide, your children are going to expose, and they're going to reveal. They're going to give it to you. They're going to say, here, Ma. Here, Tati. Here, Abba. Here it is. Here's the broken matzah. And now we choose how to respond. Part of us can get very, very triggered, and it makes sense. It's like, you know how hard I work to hide my broken matzah? I've been doing this for 50 years, and it was a good hiding place. How dare you? Now, I know this is not done verbally and it's not done intentionally, but it's done with our nervous system. You're upset. We're triggered. We don't say any words. We're nice people, but we're triggered. Come on. After everything I've done for you, look where I took you on this yeshiva week. Amazing pizza all day, 3 meals pizza. There's also another option. Another option is, wow, be curious. Wow, what just happened? Wow, that was hard for me. Psst. What just came up? What is the Mitzrayim that I may have to be able to look at now? And if I can look at it and really hold space for it and even have empathy for it and breathe through it, I actually don't have to be a captive of it anymore. I don't have to be a hostage of it anymore. Maybe one day I'll be able even to be unburdened and disentangled and transformed, but even before that. But that takes a lot of inner work, a lot of empathy. So I could take the afikomen, and I could look at my child with empathy and love and say, thank you. And I don't have to be defensive. Wow, you don't have to be defensive. Amazing. We don't have to be defensive. Some people feel if they're not going to be defensive, the whole world is going to collapse. If I can't convince you that I'm the tzaddik and you're the spoiled one, the world is going to collapse. And you know what? People are doing it because of love. They really want to protect their children. I get it. They do. It's terrifying to feel these things. That's why I don't feel them. And you want to bring it up, but sometimes you can take the Afikaim, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, look at Mitzrayim, and you'll never have to see it again. And I could say, thank you. Thank you for this awareness. And then we can eat the Afikaim, finish the Seder, and say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. In other words, we can't complete the process of redemption without eating the Afikaim, without accepting it and eating it. And then you'll actually reward your child for giving you the Afikaim. Why would you reward your child for exposing the broken matzah? Because you'll find out that the greatest growth in your life happened through these very challenging encounters. Because here is the second part of it, and this is the good news. I mean, the first is also good news, but this is even better news. The Gemara says, G'doila haisa bizas hayam mi bizas Mitzrayim. As much booty as they took out of Egypt, it was completely non-comparable to the booty that they found at the sea. Remember, it says they emptied out Mitzrayim, but it wasn't even close to what they got at the Red Sea when the Egyptian bodies came out of the sea. And they had all of their jewelry, and they had a tremendous amount of wealth and affluence that they brought with them. They all got it at the Yam Suf. And they were told to take it with them. What does this mean spiritually? What this means is that which we're afraid to look at is usually containing some of our deepest treasures. The Bizas Hayam, there are profound treasures that are hidden under those coverings, under those blockages. There's a reason that our fear has developed so acutely to be able to protect us from those places, because it's trying to protect a hidden treasure. And it feels that by hiding it, that's how we will have our treasure. It just disassociates us from our treasures because we don't have access to them. And when I have the courage to really go there and really look at it, it opens up, and then you have Bizas Hayam. You have the booty at the sea, which is infinitely greater even than what you took in Egypt. So sometimes, for example, a person at a very, very young age will develop terrible fear of life. And they'll always predict the worst in every situation for themselves and their children. And therefore they're always being hyper vigilant to control everything. And there's a reason for it. It's their love. It's their infinite love that they have for so many people. And therefore, if I'm constantly afraid, if I'm constantly paranoid, if I'm constantly hyper vigilant, if I'm going to control everything, nobody will be hurt, nobody will be harmed. So it's really a klipa, it's a shell that's protecting something so precious. Behind all of our difficult emotions, there is usually a very, very deep innocence and purity that is stored away deep. It's like a secret of your neshama. And our survival mechanism, in its own weird way, wants to protect it. And therefore it creates all of these layers and puts this into exile and then covers it up. Winston Churchill once said, in a time of war, the truth is so precious, it's protected by many bodyguards of lies. We all have deep truths that are protected by many, many bodyguards of lies. And they protect it and they cover it up. And they camouflage it. And we express it in such strange ways that don't do us well or anybody else well, but it's a survival method. And when I have the courage to really be able to look at those places, it's hard because there's grief and there's pain and a lot of empathy needed. But you're also going to find such power and creativity that is unimaginable precisely because it was hidden so well. That is exactly the symptom, that it's hiding something very, very, very precious that I don't have to hide anymore. And as a result of that, the Baal Shem Tov says that when you look at it, you won't see them again, and not only that, you're going to find tremendous biza, tremendous booty. In many ways, what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching here is not just an isolated teaching. It's really the stepping stone from going from exile into redemption. Because one of the major, as you said before, one of the major survival instincts of trauma is that we can't face so many things. We don't want to, and that's how we survive. But the relationship then with ourselves and with others and with Hashem is also very, very limited. It's dictated by very external motivations. It's sometimes dictated by very superficial emotions and instincts. It works sometimes, but there's a lack of inner wholeness. There's a lack of the inner experience of dveikus, of intimacy, of oneness. Part of the healing of that is the permission for people to look at things. And I want to emphasize here a very important point because this comes up so much. And that is the issue of shame and guilt. There's a reason we don't want to see things in ourselves because they could be so shameful. Let's face it, some of our survival skills are not very, very noble and moral. They're sometimes very, very petty, sometimes very disturbing. People have such difficult emotions. It's much easier for me to say, I don't have this. I don't deal with it. But that's worse than having the emotion. Because the shame around it just means it lives, and it lives in freedom, and it goes uncontested and unchallenged. If I could see it and look at it, I could say, yeah, this is my survival emotion. I get it. But I also have so much more. In the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shnei Zalman of Liadi, posits the famous idea that we operate not on one level of consciousness, but on many levels of consciousness. You have a nefesh elikis, you have a nefesh habahamis, you have an animal consciousness, you have a divine consciousness, as I said before. And the animal consciousness itself could be divided into 1,000 or 2,000 or 20,000 parts. So we have one brain, but we don't have one mind. We're not made of a mana mind. We don't have one mind. We have thousands of different minds, which means so many different parts and souls and consciousness that speak, and they speak all day. Sometimes you'll see a conversation happening inside your head, and there are around 25 people talking at the same time. And you're like, am I crazy? Am I going insane? Am I a meshugana? So the Tanya says you're not a meshugana. He gives this example. There's a jury with a lot of people, and it's like the Knesset. You ever see what happens in the Knesset? You ever see what happens in the Knesset? You put Jews in one room trying to figure out life. When there's danger, yeah, they scream at each other, they have to have security. It's literally what happens in most Jewish brains. It's literally the Knesset. Now, who's right, who's wrong? And you think, well, I'm so dishonest and I'm so weird and I'm so crazy. Do I love my husband? Do I not love him? Do I love my kids? I'm this, I'm this. I'm so low, I'm so high. Well, relax. There's a lot of different people in you. It's fine. You have an animal consciousness that's trying to survive in a crazy world. I get it. It will do anything. It needs to say, you're dangerous, you're not dangerous. You I can deal with, you I can deal with. You I need to impress, you. That's what it does. It can't be fully present. It's always needs to be protected. It's in a war zone. The divine consciousness is very, very present. It's very relaxed. And it could be very vulnerable because it's full of faith. It's full of trust. If I deny my animal soul, I'll never have access to my divine soul. Because I'm going to bypass who I am. I won't have access to my divine soul. My divine soul will remain in exile and the animal soul will take over. One of the deepest things we do is guilt and shame. Guilt and shame your animal soul to get your divine soul. It only takes me away further from my divine soul. It's like, oh, you can't think that, you can't feel it. How can you be like this? That's all tactics of the animal soul to keep you away from yourself. The animal soul needs to be accepted as something that can feel all types of things because it's trying to survive. There's no shame around that. It's not a mistake. God made your animal soul just like He gave you your divine soul. It's not a mistake. It's part of the purpose of your creation. The Tanya says in chapter 37, and here's a plug for my wife's Tanya classes, every other Monday in Michal for years home. It says in chapter 37 that the soul doesn't come down to fix itself. It doesn't need fixing. The neshama doesn't need a tikkun. It comes down to heal and sublimate and educate the animal soul. So that's a beautiful insight. So when I'm dealing with something, don't be afraid of your afikoman. This is exactly it. This is what I got to work on. What are you afraid? This Mitzrayim is not a mistake. God said, I'm coming down with you into Mitzrayim. I'm going to bring you back up. This is the journey of life.
Some of us get stuck in that animal soul.
Oh, so I get stuck. Right? That was the story with Lot. And he didn't even want to leave. He didn't even know there's another option. That's why you need the light for B'dikas Chametz, Erlar Ba'asar. Right? That's the difference between the Lot story and this story. not to get stuck, to be able to understand that this is what survival skills look like. And I have to know that they can be very, very overwhelming and feel that this is the only reality. And that's part of what the animal soul says. The animal soul says this is the only reality. We should have stayed in Egypt. This was a ridiculous thing. You're not going free. We're going to die here. It was just because there were not enough graves. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who deluded us. You deluded me. I am a slave at my core. This is who I am. This is what it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to be a miserable person. La'olam vad. Thank you. Now give me a cheesecake. Or give me my phone because I need a distraction. And this is what people come to. This is miserable, that's miserable, and we get it. This is all part of what the animal soul does. And it's very, very powerful. And therefore, when we have shame around that, what it does is now I'm busy arguing with my animal soul that it doesn't exist. Good luck. It's the animal soul arguing with the animal soul that it doesn't exist. You ever do that? You are arguing with you that you don't exist. So who do you think is doing the argument? Who do you think is running the show? But if I could say, yeah, of course this is what it is. There's no shame in the fact that I have all these things inside of me. Should be no shame around it. It's the shame that actually keeps me stuck in that more and more and more. When I could liberate myself from shame and know, this is going to be part of me, and it may be part of me for life. Until Mashiach comes, there's a Mitzrayim inside of me. Although we can achieve transformation, everyone according to their capacity on different levels, but there may be things that are there. You don't have to be ashamed, and you don't have to feel guilty for the fact that you're a human being. And this is part of your shlichus existing. And that means something else. If you go back to the words of Moshe, he says, if you see Egypt today, you won't see them again. He's also adding another point here. The way you see them today, you'll never see them again, which means the facts may not change, but once you look at them, you'll never have to see them in the same way that you see them today. You could look at the same story in your life from one perspective, and when you have the courage to see it, you could look at the very same story from another perspective. The way you see them today, you will never see them again. And that's what healing looks like. I could look at the experience, but I see it. And when I see it, I'll never have to see it the same way I always saw it. As long as I didn't have the courage to look at it, it showed up as a monster, as a big, dark monster threatening to overwhelm me. Once I have the courage to see it, I see I'm much larger than it. I'm much bigger than it. I define it. It doesn't define me. I could see the same facts. As somebody once gave me a metaphor, very simple but profound. You know, if I'm in a small room and you put a table in the room, the table fills the entire room. There's nowhere to move. Then you put in a couch into the room, there's mamish nowhere to move. And then you squeeze in a chair, there's nowhere to move. It's called a house in Brooklyn. That's why you made a migration here, right? Or Manhattan, even better. Studio apartments, right? What happens if you move into a large mansion? Suddenly you put the same table, you barely see it. The size of the table didn't change, but the size of where you live changed. That's in life. The story is the same story, the table is the same table, but you changed. I have different capacity. You may have the same reality, the same events, the same experiences, the same struggles. But when I'm in a tiny room, this table fills everything and it's choking, I'm claustrophobic and I can't live. When you're in a different space, oh yeah, I see the table. Okay, it's a cute little table. The way you see them today, you will never see them again the same way. Not because they're not there. There may be an inner voice, but you'll see it completely differently. Once you have the courage to look at it, you see it for what it really is. And this is the difference, pre-healing and post-healing. Pre-healing, if somebody, let's say, has caused me tremendous pain and suffering and anguish, intentionally, unintentionally, that completely defines me. When I was 3 years old, I was a real victim. I was helpless. You are helpless for an emotional neglect, or never mind other things that are more serious. I mean, I don't know what's more serious, but other things that are also very serious. Now I'm 40 or 50 or 60 or 30. In my mind, I'm still emotionally helpless. You still own my life. Parah is the master. I am the slave. Moshe Rabbeinu says, this is what we need to change. What you're seeing today, you'll never see it again in the same way if you have the courage to see it and say, wow, that table used to be so big, but now it's just a small table. Yeah. this is a transformation that is so deep, because you can't say this in words. It's an energy experience that you're in a much larger space. So you could look at it with empathy, and it's there. You don't have to deny anything. Only because you saw it can you really change your perspective. I'm just going to conclude with one last line. And this I saw from the Rebbe of Ozherov, the sefer called Be'er Moshe. And he gives one last beautiful interpretation in these words of Moshe Rabbeinu, which really completes the circle. He says what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people is, because you see Egypt today, you won't see them again. He says what he's really intimating here is a story that would play itself out much later in history. And that is, and this is the last source, at the end of Tractate Makkos, there's a story that Rabbi Akiva was traveling to Yerushalayim with three of his colleagues, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. You're talking about the greatest sages of the day. This is shortly after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. So the Temple Mount lay desolate, and suddenly they see a fox emerging from the place of the Holy of Holies, where there used to be the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and they knew it place very well because they lived through it. They see a fox coming out. So Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah start sobbing. Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says, is mesachik. He starts kvelling. He's laughing. They found that strange. They said, Rabbi Akiva, as we would say, what's the joke? What's so funny? Rabbi Akiva is a good Jew, so you don't answer, you ask another question. You answer a question with a question. Rabbi Akiva says, you ask me why I'm crying, why I'm laughing, I ask you, why are you crying? They said, how could we not cry? This is the place that Vazar HaKarev Yumas, anyone who walks in here throughout the whole year couldn't even live from the intense spirituality. And here, Shu'alim Hilchubai, foxes roam around freely. Eich loy nifka, how could you not sob to see this sight of destruction, of decline, of deterioration? So Rabbi Akiva says, L'kach ani mesachik. That's why I'm laughing. What's making you cry is making you laugh, making me laugh. And Rabbi Akiva famously says that Yeshaya Hanavi speaks about two witnesses representing two prophets. There was a prophet named Uriah, and there was a prophet named Zechariah. Uriah lived in the first Beis Hamikdash, Zechariah lived the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, generation of Mordechai, Purim time, Zechariah. Uriah prophesied, Sion Sada Techarish. Zion will be plowed like a field. It'll lay desolate like a field. Zechariah prophesied, Oid Yeshvu Skenim Eskenais Berechavis Yerushalayim. The streets of Jerusalem will yet be filled with elderly men and elderly women. In other words, Jerusalem will be completely rebuilt. In the streets of Yerushalayim, you'll see the sounds of Skenim and Skenis, and of course youth. And from old age and ripe age, they will be in the streets of Yerushalayim, repopulated, refilled with Jews. So Rabbi Akiva says, and these are his final words, the last two lines in your source sheet, Makas Chavdalet Bais, the last source. These are Rabbi Akiva's words. Ad shaloi niskayma nevuasa shel Uriah yisim misyarish le niskayma nevuasa shel Zechariah. Achshav sheniskayma nevuasa shel Uriah biyadua shenevuasa shel Zechariah miskayamas. Until the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, I was not certain that the prophecy of Zechariah will be fulfilled. But now that I see the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, Zion was plowed like a field. That's why foxes are roaming there. Foxes don't roam in homes, they go in fields. So now I know that the prophecy of Zechariah will be fulfilled. That's why I'm laughing. When I see the foxes, it's making me kvel. And the Gemara says, they told him these words, Akiva nichamtanu, Akiva nichamtanu. Akiva, you comforted us. Akiva, you comforted us. Because Rabbi Akiva saw what they saw. And that's why he asked them, why you're crying. He wasn't just curious, he understood why they were crying. He wanted to explain to them that the reason that's making them cry, that very thing is making him laugh. Now the question is, they didn't believe in the second prophecy. They also believed in it. Mashiach is one of the fundamentals of the faith. And if Rabbi Akiva wouldn't have seen the foxes, he wouldn't know that the prophecy of Zechariah would be fulfilled. Rabbi Akiva was saying something much deeper. And that is, in the prophecy of Uriah, he could already see the prophecy of Zechariah. In the plowing of the field, he can already see that explains why he brings this prophecy of Sion will be plowed like a field. There's so many prophecies in the Nevi'im about the destruction. But he brings this prophecy because when you plow a field, it's not just destruction. It's really you're preparing it for a new cycle of produce. We don't just plow a field to destroy the field. That's not what plowing is. Charisha, plowing is to make the earth fertile. You need to till the ground in order for it to grow. So Tzia inside of the Charisha is not just a prophecy of destruction. Rabbi Akiva sees what I'm seeing in the foxes as the plowing of the field. It's the beginning of it's a hard beginning. It's the painful beginning. Plowing is not the fun. The fun is when you're sitting around and eating the sourdough bread. Or on Pesach, the matzah. Talking about matzah. But the plowing, or sourdough matzah. You can't have sourdough matzah. It's impossible. Sourdough is the chametz, all right? Very good. Okay. I could have gotten away with it in a men's class, maybe. So they believed in Mashiach, of course they believed, but now we're crying. We know in the future it's going to be good. What Rabbi Akiva was saying is, nichamtonu, nichamtonu. Nechama is transformation. To be able to see in this very decline, to be able to see that, this was Rabbi Akiva's chiddush. So what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, Asher Yisem es Mitzrayim hayom le'sisiful ereisam oisam ad olam, he says, just like you see that the promise of Egypt coming back to pursue you happened. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, go back, I'm going to make Pari stubborn, he's going to pursue you, and then Egypt is going to find out. You see it happened. You see every prediction I told you happened. Pari is going to come and he's going to pursue you, even though he's a Meshugana. He already had 10 makas, did not job. Somebody once told the Kotzker Rebbe that he's an Apikoros, he's a heretic. He said, you know Apikoros. You want to know Apikoros? It's Parai. 10 plagues and he still denies. You, he says, once you get a little patch, you're done. He says, Parai, he was a tough guy. But Moshe says, you see, he came. So just like this exactly happened, Asher Yisem es Mitzrayim hayom, you could trust me, there's Nevuah, the second Nevuah, that Hashem Yilachem Lachem is also going to happen. Like Rabbi Akiva said, now I see, but according to the Baal Shem Tov, we see it's even deeper. This is the beginning of it. The seeing of Mitzrayim hayom is not something separate from the redemption. It's the beginning. That ability to look at it. And even though that's the difficult part, but as I could hold it with empathy, and I know this is actually part of the redemptive process. This gives the Jew the power to be able to look at Mitzrayim knowing that this is the beginning of the process of Lois Hasifu L'Roisam Ad Olam, never seeing them again. Have a beautiful, wonderful week. Next week we're on Be'ezer Hashem, Tuesday 9:30.